Grace, again, you and I both believe and say that grace bats last, but grace meets you exactly where you are, meets your country, meets you, meets your child exactly where they are, and it doesn't leave any of us where it found us, right? Kind of nudges us into the wheelbarrow and takes us to maybe a little bit sunnier place.
Hey everybody, it's Marianne Williamson, and thank you so much for joining me today. I was listening to somebody talk the other day about intergenerational dialogue, which is a phrase I've heard more and more of, and I thought that that's a really good thing, because I think of age as an interesting phenomenon, sort of like a big house, and every decade is like another room in the house. And when you are in the room, you're not any longer in the room you used to be in, and you're not yet in the room that you will one day be in. And all the rooms are fantastic in their own way, and they are all equally important, but they're very different. And it seems to me that the older you are, the more you know certain things. And the younger you are, the more you know certain other things. So when I hear phrases like intergenerational dialogue, it makes me feel happy, because I feel like we're starting at a new level. And that new level, of course, goes back to ancient times when there was greater respect for the elders, and I think also perhaps greater respect for the young. And there can be a deeper sharing of information. And when I say information, I don't just mean data. I really mean the wisdom born of life experience. I know in my own life, I do feel like the second half of life is where you try to understand everything you went through in the first half of life. I had read somewhere that in youth you learn, in age you understand. And I am sometimes surprised myself at how much of my own life is spent trying to understand some things about experiences I had years ago, which I just couldn't quite understand at the time, or at least not on the level that I do now. So this idea of aging like fine wine, I think you age like fine wine if there's a process of deeper understanding, this kind of alchemy of age, this kind of brew, when you put it all together. It feels to me sort of like building a lasagna. 5 years spent on the cheese, and 5 years spent on the pasta, and 5 years spent on the sauce. Then it always felt to me somewhere around 40 you start putting them all together and you have a whole lasagna. But the 50s are not nothing. When I turned 50, I wrote a book actually called Age of Miracles, about the new midlife. I had read a woman named Lydia Bronte, who said that our generation has put 15 years more onto our lifespan, but it's not at the end, it's in the middle. So middle age becomes a more expanded piece of life. And I talk in that book, Age of Miracles, about the fact that menopause and the menopausal years are kind of like a second puberty. Just like with the first puberty, childhood passes away and the life of the adolescence comes into being. Midlife is a similar kind of transition where one whole persona, your body, your spirit, your personality, something passes away and something comes to take its place. I know several years ago, Jane Fonda wrote a book that I think she talked a lot about chapter 3. And for my generation, I'm sort of the end of the boomer years. Chapter 3 is a big topic. What happens now? And you can see, one of the things I talked about in Age of Miracles is that you can see how people age. You know, you can see the people who are just doing this sort of slow denouement, and you can see people who are experiencing age as a regenerative process, as a process in which you blaze forth in a way you could never have blazed forth before, because of what you know now, how you put it all together alchemically into this brew of greater magic and possibility than you could ever have had before. And I do feel that there is a conscious or an unconscious decision on the part of everyone as we grow older. How are you going to play this? So I think that no matter what age we are, the more we can understand. The more you understand in the vertical, the more powerful you can be on the horizontal. The more you understand about what's really deeply going on inside you, the deeper dynamics in life, the more you can play the externalities of life in a much more powerful way. Well, one of the people who has always been, for me, an accompaniment, reading her books, an accompaniment in the effort to understand more deeply what's really going on, is the writer Anne Lamott. And I've had the honor to know Annie for several years, and all of her books are wonderful. She wrote a book called Bird by Bird, which is quintessential reading for anyone who wants to write or is a writer. Her book, Operating Instructions, when that came out, when she gave birth to her son, that's a book which any new mother needs to read. All of her books are fantastic. She's written 19 of them. She's a very accomplished writer, a very celebrated writer. She's in the California Hall of Fame. Books like Hallelujah Anyway, Small Victories, Almost Everything. And she has a new one. And her new one, I think, and I will be telling her this, I think it's the best yet. It's called Dusk, Night, Dawn, on revival and courage. And Annie ruminates on a lot of things. That's what she does. She talks about motherhood. She talks about Jesus. She's a devoted Christian. She talks about sobriety. She's very devoted to the path of sobriety. She is very left wing. She's really something. Her book is called Dusk, Night, Dawn, on revival and courage. An impactful book, a poignant book, and in the last chapter, a hilarious book. I'm so glad she's joining me today. Welcome her. And after that, after the interview, I hope you'll hang around for the question that I will be answering. Remember, if you have a question for me, write to Marianne at castmedia.com. Let's get started, my friend, Annie Lamott. Annie Lamott, thank you. Thank you so much for being with me.
I'm so happy to be here.
I love the book. I love the new one. And you said in the book that when you first got married, everybody kept saying to you, so how's married life? So at the age of 65, you got married for the first time to someone you met online, which I also thought was fascinating. So I feel like I should say so how's married life? Your ruminations not only on your husband, but the process by which you got to the point of meeting him, recognizing him, allowing yourself to be recognized. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I got married 3 days after I got Medicare. I'm going to be 67 on Saturday, and I got so I've been married for 2 years, and one of them was in lockdown. One of them has been in quarantine, which I don't remember being included in the vows. So it turned out that he was a beautiful choice, and God is such a show off to have brought us together. And at the same time, being in a house for 24/7 is a bit much. And sometimes I will have given thanks that morning, and then I'll listen to him chewing bacon, and I'll feel like I'm just going to lose my mind, But but then that passes. Yeah.
The book, and in a way your whole career, is about that, what you call the double passport that we have.
Yeah.
There is the man chewing bacon in a way that makes you want to just like scream, and there is the fact that it's a total miracle that you found each other.
Yeah.
And that's what you do. That's what your books do. That's your signature. It's both and. And I think, and I talked about this before you came on, how you see age that way. When we're younger, we think there's a destination, and then as we age, we realize the destination is to better understand where we were and where we are. And that, of course, is the gift of the book, and you're able to do that in so many areas. One of the things that you said about meeting Neil, your husband, was that you had stopped, it's almost a cliche, people say, I stopped looking. You didn't say it that way. But you did make some comment about the fact that you just tried to make your own life more fun. Tried to make your own life as you live it now more beautiful, and he found you. What is that little piece of advice you could give to people?
I can tell you the story of what happened because it was very specific. Like sometimes God is very trippy and woo-woo, and, it's like a lava lamp of spiritual weirdness. And then other times it's like he hands you a white paper, right? And like in the old DC days. So what happened was my son is living here, and my grandson is living here, and my older brother, who's a fundamentalist Christian, was with me. And I was taking care, I was like the flight attendant, like I was at 5 years old. I was like the flight attendant in my family because my parents were so unhappy. I have an older brother, a younger brother. And I was taking care of my brother and my son and my grandson, just natural household stuff. And I just realized how taken advantage I felt, and by my grandson's mother. And I got that bitter, martyred feeling of resentment. And I tried to get my older brother, to sort of listen, just hear me say it, right? But he didn't. He wanted to hand me a nice Christian bumper sticker. So I wanted to just poke him in the head like a baked potato because I just needed him to hear me, not to try to fix me. And so I said, I have to leave right this second. And I got in the car and I drove out to the country and I shouted and I raged and I hit the steering wheel, and it wasn't adorable. I sobbed. It was a lifetime of having felt like, that I was nobody's priority. And so then about 45 minutes later, I pulled over, and I've had a spiritual mentor for the 35 years I've been sober named Horrible Bonnie. Because she's always really, really happy and glad that I call, and no matter what condition I'm in. And I was crying and furious, and she said, Annie, this is what we paid for. And she said, just tell me what's going on. And I said, I'm nobody's priority. And I feel this kind of sheet metal loneliness sometimes. And she said, that's because you're not your own priority, and you need to be. And then you won't even have to think about it anymore. And I came home and I was weirdly blissful. I saw my older brother. He didn't know I was having an episode, or like we were talking about, that I'd been in a state. And I was just happy. I loved him. I loved to be of service. I loved to cook for people and tend to them, get them a lovely cup of tea. And I became my own priority, and I became back in love with myself. And 2 months later, I met Neil on Match, and about 2 days later, I became his priority, and he became mine.
I love how you tell the story of that you had rejected him on Match.com because he didn't like cats, and then when you came back around to him and he said, you already rejected me, and you said,
Yeah.
take me back, take me back.
Well, he's violently allergic to cats, but so the first time I saw him on Match, it's very handsome and tall and spiritual. But I would need to be with somebody who can be around cats, because to me, cats and dogs are the closest we come to knowing the divine love of God here on this side of eternity. And I had a cat. And so he thought it was because he wasn't Jesus-y enough. But I don't care how Jesus-y somebody is. I'm just, wherever, however it comes through you umbilically. And so, but then he said, oh, well, if I put brewer's yeast on the cat's kibble, I'm not allergic anymore. Well, I thought he was just trying to, get me into bed, or that he had a manuscript, right? Because I'd been on Match for a year, and men had brought me manuscripts. One brought me a plot treatment on our second date and said, is it too soon? And I was like, yeah. And
oh my God, that's
yeah,
so embarrassing.
I know, right? And then I thought, well, I'll give him a chance because he's really luscious in every way. He's brilliant, maybe overly educated. So we started putting brewer's yeast on my cat's kibble, and he stopped sneezing, and our cat sleeps with us for the last 4.5 years.
Well, you tell every word in the book is beautiful, but when you said that he asked you to marry him, you took a minute of silence, and then you said, can we have a cat? And once he nodded, then you said yes. Something that you also just touched upon, which is it's an experience that a lot of people are having today, and that's that you're an intergenerational household. Yeah. You have your son living there and your son's son. Mm-hmm. You've already talked about this rather stressful aspect of this. A lot of people are going through it now. A lot of reasons are economic, have to do with COVID, et cetera. Any particular advice or insight you throw out to people who are dealing with that?
Well, I just did a book club with readers. It's called Moms Don't Have Time to Read, but it's women that are subversively finding time to read. And the women I talked to had babies. They not only have babies and toddlers and little ones and scary teenagers, they have old folks, they have parents who have gotten old and a little funny or maybe a lot funny. And so what I go through now is like nothing, child's play compared to what most of the world has gone through. And the advice I had was this thing about somehow against all odds making yourself your own priority, because you're coming then from a really filled up place where you're not offering love and support and nourishment and caregiving from a place of your Swiss cheesy insides. You're coming from a place of being filled up, of having of my cup runneth over, instead of running around with a half empty cup trying to get people's overflow into your cup, And people, I've taught writing for 30 years, and people always spent most of the classes explaining to me where they weren't writing yet, but they were going to as soon as their last child moved out of that. Right, you get this shit. As soon as they moved up to the Russian River, where it's quiet, when they have an office. I didn't have an office till I was 40 something, and I said, you know what, you're not going to write once you're retired. If you're not doing it now, it's not going to happen. You do it as a commitment. You do it by prearrangement. It's like thinking that if you lose 20 pounds, you'll start to have good self-esteem. If you don't feel good about love, radical self-love at 160, you're not going to have it at 140, because it's an inside job. So I'd say to people, like the moms with little kids and toddlers and scary teenagers around, or to writing students, meet me halfway. Find me half an hour. If you can find me half an hour, we can get down. If you can get up half an hour earlier, if you can write, if you can go for a walk, if you will walk outside and notice that the daffodils have all blossomed, and when they're in their crazy yellow and orange clown frills and their big schnozzes, and you can do that for half an hour, you're going to nurture from a completely different place. And so that's the best advice I can offer. And it's hard. But you know what? The book is about how good we are at hard. We've stopped fashion
that is
times. We've stopped smallpox. We thought of the antiretrovirals. We overturned a fascism again months ago, right? I mean, we're good at hard.
That is what the book is about, is what you do believe in, that which does not change, the love of friends, the love of community. And you have that very profound, and of course, the older you get, the more layers of your own insight, talking about what you do believe in, what you do have faith in. I want to, before we get off the topic, though, of making yourself your own priority, so many of us, having read your books, feel like we know Sam. We know your experience as a mother. But what about being a grandmother? What is different about being a grandmother?
Well, it's so much easier. Oh my God. Sam had a really tough teens, and he got heavily into drugs and alcohol. And he then had a baby. He went away for a year to this very, very profound rehab and kind of spiritual reset place in both at a tofu farm in Spokane and at a Native American lodge on the highest peak of the Alleghenies. He came back and his response was to start dealing now on top of it. And in fact, he ended up in jail. But I go to a 12-step program for people that try to save and fix and rescue people and who have tiny control issues. So when the bail bondsman said, I said, leave him there. If I fish him out tonight, he could die, And so Sam was there for a couple nights, which he did not love. And the bail bondsman said to him, I've been a bail bondsman for 30 years in Marin, and not one single mother has ever said no to me.
Leave him there.
Right. Leave him there and release him to his own higher power, which is not me. I'm a retired higher power, and release him to the terrible consequences of his behavior, which is the only thing that ever got a single person clean and sober in history. And so not one single person has gotten anybody else clean and sober. So then it made sense to him at 19 to have a baby. So good idea, Sam. And so then he had a baby, and he and the mom and the baby were all living with me just down the street from where we are now. And at one point, Sam was just too erratic to be with the baby anymore. And I set a boundary, which is the secret of life. And I said to him, you can't be at this house anymore until you're clean and sober. You got a little one now, and you gotta you gotta clean up your act and not be scary. When I sent him away and I took my sticky fingers off the controls of that young man, he called me 10 days later. This is 9.5 years ago. And he said, I've got a week under my belt now. The men in the San Francisco community fished me out. I'm going to 2 meetings a day. I said, can I come over and see I said, can you be here for dinner? And then he never left because he never left sobriety. So having a baby, a grandchild, Sam and I actually wrote a book about it called Some Assembly Required. That's my favorite. I've written 19 books now, and it's my favorite. And it's about the experience of being a grandparent. Because having failed to save and fix and rescue Sam, I set about trying to save and fix and rescue the baby. And I had to remember that my help is not helpful. God's help is helpful. A parent's help is helpful. But we have kids that we're the same age, and we have kids that are the same age, and we were both single parents. We've had the incredible hard time a long time ago in my case. But left to my own devices, I would run along Sam on his hero's journey with like sunscreen and a juice box. And that would be so damaging to a sense of self and to a sense of expansion and wonder and getting to make his own mistakes and getting to make comebacks. And so I want to do certain things with Sam and his son. And I grip myself gently by the wrist and I say, Annie, stop, breathe. Let's go back inside. So, it's one day at a time, and some days are just way too lifey for me, but we both have a program. And Jax is lovely. He's 11 and a half. I can't believe it. I said to him at his last birthday, I said, oh, God, I thought you were like 4. He said, Nana, I live here. How can you think I'm 4? So I think I'm 47, and Daddy's 20. But anyway, he's lovely and very funny.
Well, in the book, you not only go forward talking about the son, talking about the grandson, but also, of course, go backwards, talking about your parents. And one of the things that I thought was fascinating is that your grandfather was a Christian missionary. Mm-hmm. Although, at least on a conscious level, your experience as a Christian was not specifically tied to that. Was your relationship with Jesus, that is obviously a big deal to you, specifically connected to your getting sober, or was that already happening as a big thing in your life before you got sober?
I could write a whole book about that. Maybe I have, but what brought me to my knees was my alcoholism and drug addiction. And when I first got sober, I was 32. A man said to me, by the end, I was deteriorating faster than I could lower my standards.
Yeah, I think you say that in this book.
Yeah, I love that line. And I was there at 31. But I'd always believed in God. I just didn't want to be a Christian because of the Christian right in America. And my father had hated Christians because his father had been a Presbyterian missionary in Japan right after the First World War, the war to end all wars. Ha ha. And my father just hated Christians. And so I was a perfect daughter, and I agreed to too. But that last year I was drinking, I would hear this music wafting over from this flea market I used to go to in what we used to call this ghetto in Marin City, where there are 2,000 people, mostly of color, and there were 6 churches for a community of 2,000. But from this one church, it was Presbyterian. That's why I think God has such an amazing sense of humor, because my grandfather had been a Presbyterian missionary. God's frozen chosen, they call him.
Yeah, frozen chosen in the book.
But it's okay if you're one of them, that we are a joke. We're all about committees and casseroles. But anyway, so I started going in there because to the church, it was ramshackle. It was buckled linoleum, about 40 people, but they were singing the songs that you and I grew up on this, of the spirituals of the civil rights movement, of I shall not be moved and swing low, sweet chariot. And they were singing gospel, and it got in so deep. But the most profound thing was, and I share this with all ministers and rabbis, they didn't try to get me to believe anything. They didn't try to get me to Bible study. Best of all, they didn't try to come over for a home visit where I would have run screaming for my cute little life. They didn't try to get me to figure out the Jesus thing or who shot the Holy Ghost, or they could just see that I was really scared and lonely. And so they got me water. And to this day, that's my instructions from Jesus are get everybody some water. Everyone's thirsty. And so I stayed for a year drunk, and I felt Jesus following. I wrote about this in Traveling Mercies. I remember we talked about this. I was living in a 10 by 10 houseboat in Sausalito, and I could feel Jesus running alongside me like a little feral cat. And he wanted to come in, but if you let him in, then you have a cat. I didn't want a cat. I didn't have a cent in the world. And then finally, sometimes grace looks just like exhaustion. It looks like running out of any more good ideas. It's often the dark night of the soul. And so I said sort of bitterly, okay, fine, you can come in. And that's my moment of conversion. I said, okay, fine, you can come in. And
you have a part in the book where you say Jesus is looking over his Benjamin Franklin glasses at you. Mm-hmm. And I also loved the part where you had been judging the man Eric, and you went to church that Sunday, and the minister looked right at you and totally called you on the fact that you were judging Eric. Because one of the things that you talk about in the book quite a bit is if you love anybody, it doesn't mean anything unless you're willing at least to love everybody.
Yeah, I hate
but you were also... Yeah, you hate that, right? Well, you also famously out there San Francisco lefty.
Yeah.
So how'd you do with the Trump years? How was it for you, all that universal love when Donald Trump was president?
Well, some days are just too long. That's the reality. And that, my great friend Tom Weston, I get credit for this line, but he said, you can tell you've created God in your own image because God hates all the same people you do. And that to me is what the Christian right is all about. I believe that they look through the scripture, both the New Testament and the Hebrew Bible, looking for people to hate, and then they are able to relax. And I had to go look in the mirror, and I had to see that it wasn't them that was the problem, that I'm the problem. I love what Martin Luther King said, don't let them get you to hate them. And I thought about that every single day of Trump, because I was apoplectic a lot. And but we do what's possible, we do what's possible. And what was possible was for me to go to a lot of marches. And what was possible for me was to give away money whenever I could to the ACLU and to the lawyers representing the children at the border. And then when COVID struck, he had a year of COVID and not one good thing except for data came out of it. So I did what I could. I went to Safeway and I filled paper bags full of canned foods and powdered goods and, Oreos for the kids. And I drove over to the food pantry in our area where all the people who are of service live, who have the highest incident of COVID. And I dropped it off and I came back home and I did what I could, and I did my spiritual work, and I kept looking in the mirror to see what, the prayer had to be for me, bless them and change me. And I gave out at least a dozen copies of Arlie Hochschild's amazing book, Strangers in Their Own Land, where this UC Berkeley sociologist in a bubble here with me, I'm in her bubble actually sometimes in real life, went to Appalachia, went to Baton Rouge, went to the outside of the big cities of Louisiana, and she became a friend to the people who thought that Trump was on their side, and she listened. The most profound thing we do, she sat and listened. She wasn't going to change them, and they sure weren't going to change her, but she ate with them. She went to church with them. She sat on the porch and rocked with them. And so I gave that to everyone because that's what changes you molecularly, is that kind of love from people with whom you have almost nothing in common. Because they're seeing the truth of yours. Yeah.
That, to me, is what the entire book was about, wasn't it? The love that is there and that you have faith on no matter what. I'm looking at page 189 where it says, love will get in. It will wear you down. Love is ruthless, whether you notice this or not. Love is Sandy Koufax, Macon Rapono. It will win. It always does, at least in the long term. Think Susan B. Anthony, who died before people like me got to vote. Now, I don't know if you have the book in front of you, but if you look on page 190, do you have the book in
I
front of you by
do.
any
I'm
chance?
getting a little cold. I
It would be such an honor if you would read that paragraph, that long paragraph on 190. Would you be willing to do that
of
for
course. Are
us?
you kidding? Of course. Oh, trust me on this?
Mm-hmm.
Trust me on this. We are loved out of all sense of proportion. Yikes and hallelujah. Love reveals the beauty of sketchy people like us to ourselves. Love holds up the sacred mirror. Love builds rickety greenhouses for our wilder seeds to grow. Love can be reckless. Jesus is good at this. Or meek as my dog. Or carry a briefcase. Love is the old man in the park teaching little kids to play the violin. Much time spent tuning, the children hearing their way into the key he is playing. My parents heard the key as success, security, moving expeditiously and living as expected. But love lumbers like an elephant. It naps on top of your chest like a cat. It gooses you, snickers, smooths your hair. Love is being with a person wherever they are, however they are acting. Ugh, a lot of things seem to come more easily to God. Can I read a bit more?
Sure, do whatever
But
you
yeah,
want.
because this piece is about loving and forgiving entirely my
Yes.
parents, holding on to this funny little ivory elephant my dad had gotten on his father's missionary work in Japan. And my mother had this crummy little corn husk Hawaiian Christmas tree ornament. And those two things were pretty much all I had left of them. But one winged love teems and lurches around us. Because it does, we can always be hopeful, if not effusive. The hope is knowing that this love trumps all, trumps evil, hate, and death. It makes us real as life slowly sews us our human shirts. We are being shepherded beyond our fears and needs to becoming our actual selves. This sucks and hurts on some days, and I frequently do not want it or agree to it. But it persists, like water wearing through a boulder in the river. Hope springs from realizing we are loved, can love, and are loved with skin on. Then we are unstoppable. This hope is from a deep, deep place that somehow my parents seeded in me. Love is not a concept. It is alive and true, a generative and nutritious flickering force that is marbled through life. I can hold it in my hands whenever I remember to, stroke its ivory belly, hear its crunch, its rustle. So, Marianne, how would you answer that question you just asked me? And how did you come through the 4 years of Trump?
Very much what you said.
Yeah.
Very much what you said. You know, Martin Luther King also said, God didn't tell me I have to like my enemies.
Yeah.
He said I have to love them. He
Yeah.
didn't say I have to like them. But also, he said something that meant a lot to me that is very similar to what you were talking about, your friend going and being with these people. He said, you have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt.
Oh,
So that meant a lot to me.
beautiful. Yeah.
This whole business of your politics and Jesus, you have a line in the book. You said, I believe in antibiotics and chemo and also in the laying on of hands. Sue me. I got in a lot of trouble during my presidential campaign for saying I believe in antibiotics and chemo and also in the laying on of hands.
I know.
When you were talking about the judgmentalness of people on the right, I have found, and I'm sure you have too, there's a lot of judgmentalness among people on the left as well.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly when it comes to faith. But you have been saved. I haven't seen you being targeted for the fact that you believe in both. You have a strong faith in God, and you have these strong left-wing politics. Now, you and I grew up at a time when there was more of a religious left,
Mm-hmm.
before this strongly secularized leftist vision.
But when I'm in the South, God, I'll be talking about my Sunday school kids or something my pastor said that radicalized me or saved me that day or whatever. And somebody will call in and they'll say in that sweet accent, they'll say, well, Annie Lamott, you are very witty indeed. And I wonder just how funny it will seem to you when you're rotting in hell for all eternity. And then I say, thank you for sharing. You get to think that. You get to wonder that. God bless you good. And you take care. I always say you take care to people when I'm actually enraged. Like whenever I would break up with a man, I would always say, you take care. But that's what I say to the people in the religious right when they attack me, because it's so hostile to say, hey, you take care.
Yeah. Bless your heart is what they say there. Bless your heart. I think, and of course, as I've already said to people, this book, Dusk, Night, Dawn, is a fantastic book. But nothing is better than that last chapter, that coda. What's it called? Heartbreak? Is that what it's called? I'm not
forgot.
Sure. The story of you at Esalen.
Yeah.
And the story of, there's so much there. And I was laughing hysterically. It was a belly laugh. There was a friend in the next room. What are you laughing at? It was as poignant and as painful as it was hilarious. But one of the things that I thought was so interesting was when you met the woman, there was a couple next door. When you met her, she was so sexy and so sweet, and you thought, you're wondering if she was a fraud.
Uh-huh.
Right? Mm-hmm. But then at the end, the mercy that she showed you.
Yeah.
The love that she showed you after the way you had behaved the night before.
Yeah.
I don't want to give away too much of the book. Yeah. And that she showed you such kindness, I thought that was quite extraordinary. And you said that you got sober. It took another year, Annie, after that?
Yeah, I think it took another year.
You could have lost your life that night.
I could have, yeah. I drove drunk. Yeah. I drove on acid. I mean, I can't believe that I was one of the few alcoholics and who was just fished out of the slough and set back on my feet and given a new chance at life. But that's where I use that line. I had a terrible, terrible experience that involved barging in on her and her husband, but I won't wreck it. But at any rate, the next morning, her husband looked at me like a reptile at breakfast.
Yeah,
like
you put that in the
barely
book.
Flickering. But then she looked at me with the eyes of love, like Helen Prejean in, Dead Man Walking. She said, just keep looking at me. I'm going to be the eyes of love. As you walk to your death, just keep looking at me. Keep your eyes on me. I'm your eyes of love. And when that woman looked at me with the eyes of love, it changed me. And it didn't seem like in the visible world that anything changed, but that's not the world that I'm more interested in. My inside, the part of the divine that surrounds me and indwells me, it was like it just sort of sat up and took note. It thought, now we're talking.
Well, she and her husband interpreted you were being in their room very differently. He obviously was strong judgment, and she obviously realizing you had to have been in a lot of pain. Something had to have been really wrong for that to even be happening.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting what you're saying. You said you drove on acid, etc. When I used to do some work inside women's prisons, I met women. Annie, there but for the grace of God go I. I think that's so true of many of us in our generation. The things we went through that could have gone another way. We could have ended up in jail for the rest of our lives. We could have ended up easily with AIDS. People I knew who got AIDS from one night stands, etc. The gratitude of feeling that we survived so much that we survived and get to live to tell the tale.
Amen.
I think that your presentation in your books of how every little thing is precious. Every little thing is precious, even the things that we didn't notice. I think you have a line in the book about, I think it's Neil says, everything we need to see in life, we can see the first 10 minutes of a walk.
Yeah.
Was that the line?
Yeah. Everything you need to know about God and love and truth, about everything you can get in a 10-minute walk. You know, my pastor, our last pastor, Veronica, had this great sermon on how you could trap bees in mason jars with a drop of honey on the floor of it with no lid, because they just kind of walk along around in their bad moods because they feel trapped and they bump into the glass walls, and all they have to do is look up, right? And then they can fly away. And so if I'm feeling a little crunchy, let's say, and I get outside and I look up, I don't look up and go, oh, it's a medium full moon tonight. You know, it's a medium baby moon. Oh, well, there's whatever. There's another green shoot breaking through the grout, whatever, concrete or whatever. You don't think that. It stops you in your tracks in the best possible way. And you say, wow, which is the praise prayer, and which instantly helps you reset the button so that you're back in curiosity, you're back in the praise and the wow and the, oh my God. You know, it's funny, when Sam was a little boy, he came to me one day. He was raised at my church. He came to me and said, you know, I think I know why people call God God. And he was about 5. And I said, he said, you know, sometimes if you go outside and it's just so beautiful. You go, God.
He didn't even have sex yet. That's when
I know, right?
So
right.
There's another fantastic part in the book along the line of what you're just saying, where you were outside, you took a walk, and you saw a tree that had fallen down,
Mm-hmm.
and you were looking at the roots, and that's really what your book does. But not just this book, all of your books. It's just look at life, see. There's a difference between looking at something and truly seeing something.
Yeah.
And there's a difference between looking at a person and really seeing the person.
Mm-hmm.
Like the married couple. He looked at you, she saw you.
Yeah.
And the gift. And you
Yeah.
talk about that in terms of you and Neil, too.
Yeah.
You feel that you are seen.
Yeah.
And I think that's when you feel that you were someone's priority, when they see you, right?
Mm-hmm. When they see you, and when, like, I always think in the book I talk about with my Sunday school kids, talking about the soul as the innermost the Russian nesting doll, you know, that you have, like, I have a performance artist surface, and then I have who I am around people I love but don't know that well, and then who I am, one more Russian nesting doll inside, who I am with my closest girlfriends, and Sam and Jackson Neal, and then deeper and deeper and deeper into what Ram Dass called the heart cave, where there's me and God, Jesus and Mary, and my little 5-year-old Annie. And in that place, I think, is my soul. And I let Neil and 2 friends see that, you know. And there's a piece called Can You Love Me Now? You know, because you let people see dark, shadowy parts of you that you haven't healed yet. And you let them see them. And then it's like that old AT&T or Verizon commercial. Can you hear me now? But it's, can you love me now? You've seen this. You've seen what a whiny baby I can be. Can you love me now? I want to tell you something I did. I told Neil a secret the other day, and I said, can you love me now? And they love you even more because of the trust, and because there's only one of us, really, you know, and our biographies are different, but there's only one of us. And so it's for people to see you is so, it's graduate school. To me, it's graduate.
Well, I think that something really profound happens when we're willing to see ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That which it seemed like such a big deal once you cast light on it. I mean, I love it when you're at the theater, and I totally could relate to that. I totally could relate to that. And you were so impatient, and you couldn't stand being there, and you had so much judgment of the people on the stage. And you just looked at all that ugliness, and it was almost funny because you saw it, and once you saw it, it didn't have to be there anymore.
It was funny eventually, like my book of spiritual essays called Grace, parentheses, eventually. But no, I felt like I was having a nervous breakdown. I really did. And at a theater where people were telling lovely stories about their childhood, and it went on and it went on, and the seasons changed, and my hair grew long and tangly in the wind, and they were still telling their stories. And then finally, you know what happened? Well, you know what happened because you read the book, but this woman came up to me who I didn't know, from Adam's house cat, and she mentioned that she was sober also. And it was like it was like this funny little Dr. Seuss character inside of me went, ooh, ooh, ooh. And we went outside, and she had noticed I was doing this thing that my therapist had taught me. I'll show you, where you tap the spot between your thumb and your forefinger.
I know it well.
Yeah, you tap, and it brings you back to health and truth and your center. And she said, I saw you tapping. And then she started tapping me. She said, can I tap you? If that's not the laying on of hands, when a stranger is tapping you, when you've been at your absolute craziest and you've told her about it, then I don't know what is, but I was changed.
I want to ask you, you seem to say throughout the book that yes, despite it all, despite everything that's happening in the world, despite all the environmental threats, that you have hope, for the younger generation. But in the book, I felt that there was in the tone of the book, a mix of hope and resignation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that way?
Well, I feel that we're having a miracle and a renewal and a resurrection story in this country. And at the same time, the poor are getting poorer. And because of Biden, the poor are getting a lot more help than they got for the last 4 years. But my heart is still broken. You know, in the poverty of children and the elderly in this country, I see the crucified Christ. And I don't know why everyone doesn't see that and see that we're called upon to go there with whatever our very best selves and everything. I mean, you know, when Texas had that terrible freeze, was it in January or December? And so many people died, and the elderly froze to death, and the children went hungry. What you saw was the crucified Christ, and what you saw was this global outpouring of the laying on of hands and the bringing of blankets and the bringing of food and the bringing of love, and you saw a resurrection story. But we didn't see that for 4 years, and it wore me out, I have to say, a little bit. And I think there's a part of me that is resigned right now. But I think it's like post-traumatic stress. My heart feels, it does, you know, I try to be really permeable. And you know, like when you have a wonderful audience, I know you feel this because we've done it with each other, but you feel like you're in a tide pool and you're pouring tide and krill and tiny shells and little crabs out into them, and it passes amongst them, and then the tide comes back in and it washes over you with their love and their nourishment, their oxygen, their bubbles, their crabs. And because we didn't have that, I felt like I got a little brittle. I also got used for 4 years to being stunned. Like every morning we'd wake up at like 6:45 and there'd be breaking news, and it'd be shocking. It never happened before. And then at 1, right after lunch, there'd be new breaking news that didn't have anything to do with the earlier breaking news. And then by the time Rachel Maddow came on, there was new breaking news that had nothing to do with you know? And I feel now sort of in post-traumatic stress, but I also feel like I'm being loved back to health. I wish God had a magic wand, but it's happening one day at a time. It's happening because of precious community. It's happening because of Holy Spirit. It's happening entirely because of love.
You know, I see it slightly differently. I totally see the Trump years the way you see them. Mm-hmm. And I see the fact that there's a reprieve now. Mm-hmm. I feel there's an intention to love. But the way I see it, Trump was a death spiral. Mm-hmm. Biden has interrupted the death spiral. Mm-hmm. But we have not ended the trajectory of a slow and steady decline.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
We haven't. And so when you talk about how we're in a resurrective mode, and a period of rebirth and resurrection, I think we can go into a period of resurrection and rebirth. But it doesn't feel to me, Annie, like, you know, one of the things that you say in the book is love will win. I definitely agree with that. But it seems to me, you know, like you talk about a lot about sobriety. It has now, enough Americans have known people who OD'd, enough Americans have known people who died of alcoholism, that it is now part of the mainstream narrative that we understand what an intervention is. Enough people have seen, Tiffany fall down the stairs or John talk, crazy at his sister's wedding, that enough people have either made the phone call or heard someone say, do you think we ought to do something? We understand that if that behavior goes too far, they could die. They could die, and someone intervenes. I think we're stuck in some magical thinking about the United States. I think we need some history lessons in the fact that great civilizations have crashed and burned before. There is no guarantee that our democracy will make it. I agree with you, there's a guarantee that love will make it, but that's not the same as saying there's a guarantee that our democracy will make it, or even a guarantee that our species will make it. And that's why I wonder how much... there's the resurrection factor, but there's also the Moses factor. Somebody needs to call Pharaoh on his shit.
Yeah, it's true.
And I that's what I'm left with. That I share your belief that love will ultimately win, but sometimes I think we're a little... it's not like if only we elect the Democrats, then everything will be okay. There's got to be a little more than that.
Of course there is, but we do what's possible. The first thing God says to Moses in the Hebrew Bible is he says, take off your shoes, feel the earth, be here, feel the earth. And so we start by I feel like we're at the stage right now where we've taken off our shoes again. We're feeling the earth. Yeah. We're not in front of MSNBC. I was in front of MSNBC 10, 12 hours a day because I felt like I couldn't take my eyes. It was like cobra hypnosis, And yet I feel now that we've taken off our shoes and in some way we're back and our feet are on the earth again. And we're looking around and it's Easter and it's Passover and things are so much better. And the system is terrible. Life is complex and messy, and it's not fast and clean and cute, and it's unfair, and jerks win. And that's the reality of American life. So where are we? Well, we're back from something, and
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, we're back from something, and we're looking around. Everyone I know is sending money to the food pantries. You keep it simple. All I can do is send off money to the food pantries today and to calm my cranky, very lonely aunt who has been mean to me for like 64 of my 67 years here because I know she's lonely and I know that I'm not going to change her and she doesn't really approve of me. And what I'm going to do is what God said to do, which was to call her and be the living water and to say, hi, I'm just thinking about you. What are you up to today? I miss you. I dropped a book off for you. Did you get it? I want to see you, but I can't yet. And that's all I can do today. And then, all through this, Trump, you and I were both raised by fathers who understood, mothers too, who practiced and supported nonviolent resistance. And that's what we did for 4 years. And it seemed like it didn't pay off because every week seemed like it was even worse. But nonviolent resistance, it changes the people who are hurting you, right? That's the point. That you look at the Amish, right? When there was that terrible slaughter and the man killed all the schoolgirls and the Amish welcomed the wife of the shooter into their worship and into their memorial services. They said, you're part of this too. Come be with us. And when at Mother Emanuel, when the man slaughtered all the people at the Bible study, they spoke forgiveness. And that changed people. And it changed people who didn't want to be changed, who think that they're right, and who do think that they created God in their own. They didn't create God in their own image, but coincidentally, he does hate all the same people they do. Like women and gay people and whatever, and people of color. But so that has, even though we didn't see results.
But we did see results. He did not win a second term. That's a huge result.
We didn't see him the next day after lunch.
Yeah.
That work we did of non-resistance, nonviolent resistance changed people. And so many people are changed who did not want to or agree to be changed. And we're seeing that now. I'm more in favor I'm more excited by Biden, I think, but we're seeing that that God over and over again is such a show off, and that last night the parliamentarian said there wasn't one more thing that they could do with reconciliation, probably infrastructure. He said there's three more. Now, you can't get from where we were to where we are now, where there are going to be three more. But it's like grace again. You and I both believe and say that grace bats last, but grace meets you exactly where you are, meets your country, meets you, meets your child exactly where they are, and it doesn't leave any of us where it found us, right? Kind of nudges us into the wheelbarrow and takes us to maybe a little bit sunnier place. And so I believe that I am seeing grace as spiritual WD-40 in tightly knotted little gold chains, such as I was very good at unknotting as a child. And I'm seeing that the country has been spritzed by January 6th. January 6th changed people. It changed people who didn't agree or want to be changed. It scared them to death. They thought, wait, this can't be right. This is not what I believe. And even though they haven't voted again yet, they have been changed. And God only changes us for the better. You know, God doesn't get us some consignment store change. You know, God changes our souls and our hearts. And then we're, you know, let me just tell you one thing that I really love. I think it really kicked the shit out of my any feeling I had about being a big shot, because I was reunited with Martin Luther King and Henry Nouwen's promise and belief in the precious community, the beloved community, that was where the change was going to happen. And I feel that the beloved community has expanded because of those 4 years of Trump and because of January 6th. I think that things are a lot more spacious than they were even 4 months ago. And I just keep thinking, let's just keep doing what we've always done. We feed the poor. We talk one-on-one, you and me, with people. We talk with a group of 1,000. We write our books. We try to disseminate spiritual truth. And we practice, we march. And and Molly Ivins said, freedom fighters don't always win, but they're always right. And I just keep thinking that we're kind of back, like Moses having taken his shoes off. Now what? To be revealed.
I don't disagree with anything you're saying.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I'm any less hopeful for Biden than you are.
Mm-hmm.
I also think, though, that no amount of private charity can compensate for a basic lack of social justice.
No, absolutely not.
And the system, when you were talking about the poor children,
yeah.
When I hear a plan that will eradicate half of child poverty,
Mm-hmm.
eradicating half of child poverty is not enough.
No.
Eradicating all of child poverty has got to be our goal. And also, even when you were talking about Martin Luther King and the beloved community, there was also the bus boycott. There was also his calling out the sins not only of racism and poverty, but also militarism. Mm-hmm. And if he had just talked about the beloved community, he probably would have lived to be a ripe old age.
But I just want to tell you one story, that because I believe everything you said, and half of child poverty is both a miracle. All truth is a paradox. It's a miracle, and it's nowhere near enough. There's a woman in my recovery group, my 12-step recovery group, and 10 years ago, she got a horrible oral cancer that most people die of. 3% live. She had to have part of her jaw removed, part of her tongue. So she had this speech impediment, and she got chemo. She lived. She was very faithful. And then a few years ago, she said to the group, it had come back, and she was going to need to go through chemo again. And so everybody started trying to save and fix and rescue her like they do. And, oh, yeah, my uncle had that, and he's fine. And, oh, my beautician's nephew had that, and he had oxygen therapy, and he's just fine now. And, she just waved it away like smoke. She just waved it away in smoke. She said, you know what? God's got it. And I wear those 3 words on my necklace. God's got it. Because I'm doing what I can one day at a time. Henry Nouwen, who talked about the precious community, a Jesuit from France, he comes to America. He could not be higher, more acclaimed. He's about Yale. He's about Harvard. He's about the New York Times bestsellers list, right? And he gives it up to go live in a community of people that are developmentally disabled. And for 20 years, he raises a boy into a man who could never once say one single word to him. And that was where he was found. And he had been lost in the chaos and the temptations of the world, and he got found. And so these things are all true, that it sucks. I hate it. I hate it. And I'm hopeful. And grace does bat last. And things are a little better. And just for today, I'll take it.
You know, Annie, it was an honor to have a chance to talk to you today, because you're as profound when you're talking about it as when you're writing about it. And I know that people are listening to what you're saying and going, wow, wow, wow.
Something the great novelist and progressive E.L. Doctorow said years and years ago, 20 years ago. He said, writing, and I would add everything, is like driving at night with the headlights on. You can only see a little ways in front of you, but you can make the whole journey that way.
Well, you're quite a headlight for all of us. And I love how you talk in this book about being in the third, when it all comes together, and the alchemical brew of your wisdom and the way you just sprinkle your magical words. I love you, Annie. It was great to have a chance to be with you. It was great to have a chance to hear you. I hope everybody will run and get Dusk, Night, Dawn. And I hope that I get to meet Neil. I hope I get to be with Sam. I hope I get to see you again when all this COVID phenomenon breaks up. And I know that both of us, having gone through the years, will appreciate our next hug even more than we ever have. So thank you very, very much.
Bye-bye.
God bless you, darling.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. So that was our conversation with one of our wisest women voices, Annie Lamott. How fantastic is she? I thought that interview was filled with some of her greatest wisdom and advice and illuminating thoughts. I don't know about you, I want to listen to that several times and just take in ever more deeply some of the things that she said. I want to thank those of you who have written into Marianne at castmedia.com with your questions. The one I'm going to take now is from Christine. Christine says, "This morning I learned that a dear friend of mine died in her sleep last week. How do you cope with the loss of friends, knowing that more losses are on their way, since you, along with all of your friends, are aging? Also, what tips do you have for coming to terms with declining health? Thanks, Christine." You know, a line that has meant a lot to me was when the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung said, "The failure to deal with the subject of death robs the second half of life of its meaning." And I see a real difference between those after a certain age who have dealt with or are dealing with the subject of death versus those who either haven't or who aren't. Perhaps because I'm a student of A Course in Miracles, where it says that the life of the body is just like a suit of clothes, that birth is not the beginning of life but a continuation, that death is not the end of life but a continuation. I have what a lot of people I know have. I'm not afraid of death. I'm afraid of dying, and I'm certainly afraid of dying certain ways. I think most of us have that. But the idea of what happens after we die is not problematical to my soul. And having achieved that, which is something that any serious spiritual practice gives you, because it's all about that enlightenment transition from self-identification being identification with the body to becoming identification with the spirit. The more we have that, the less attached we are to the body in terms of what happens after we die, but also, I believe, the healthier perspective we have on the body while we're here. And according to the Course in Miracles, that actually helps us with physical pain and so forth. I think that our recognizing, in Christianity and in Judaism, both are visually symbolized by the intersection point between the axis of the divine and the axis of the earthly. In the Christian cross, there's the vertical axis that meets the horizontal, and in the Jewish Star of David, there are the two pyramids that intersect, one leading to God and one leading to the human mortal plane. And the more we have that kind of integrative approach where we deeply appreciate, we get the poignancy, we get the fact that, oh my God, my time is running out. This won't last forever. I'm already past that point. I remember hearing, of all people, I remember when Bill Clinton used to say, there's more time behind me than in front of me. I mean, you do reach an age where this is clear to you. I remember when I turned 50, it was very difficult for me because my youth was over. I remember saying, I don't feel old yet, but I'm not young anymore either. And then at 60, you start seeing death on the horizon. You hope it's not too soon, but you start having this experience of cleaning up the campsite. And so, Christine, when you talk about the sad aspects of it, yes, but there are also the grand aspects of it, something very important. I find, for instance, one of the interesting things is it's counterintuitive how much I feel the urgency of historical circumstances. On one hand, if I was only looking at it rationally, I'd say, well, I'll probably be out of here before it gets too bad, no matter what happens with the environment, etc. And yet there's something where the closer you are to death, somehow the more you care. What's going to happen? Yes, but what about my grandchildren? What about my great-grandchildren? What about those who will come generations after me? So I wouldn't want to miss this. It's like when we were talking with Annie Lamott today about how age is just another room in the house, when you're in your 50s, when you're 60s, when you're in your 70s. And one of the most magnificent women I know is in her 80s. Let's not miss out on the glory of age either. And the fact that it's a shorter period of time that we all have, and a shorter period of time that we have with the people that we love, and that our friends are starting to, some of our friends go, some of our friends, no matter. I was talking to a girlfriend of mine today. We've known each other since we were 6 years old. We were talking about how old we are now. And yet it's not a less important conversation. And it wasn't an ain't it awful conversation. It's an ain't it profound conversation. My best friend Richard died suddenly. And the night before he died, we had a fight. We weren't talking on the phone, but it was over email. And he said, I was hurt by something. And I was so close to saying, fuck you, Richard. And then I said, don't say that. Don't say that. But I remember having that thought. And he died that night. Oh my God, if those had been my last words to him, I don't know how I would live with myself. So I never forgot that. I'm so grateful. And I learned from having lost my best friend suddenly, you never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen. And that's no matter how old someone is. And speaking of Richard was terrified of death. And we used to talk about the fact that I had a more sanguine approach to it. And he's like, I don't want to talk about it. I wish we had. I might feel a little more complete with him. But I feel complete. I know he's there. And I know that I'll see him again. And I always felt, the night I met him, it was an AIDS support group in Los Angeles. And he was on the other side of the room. He was a gay man, but he didn't present as a gay man. And so I didn't know he was gay. And I looked at him and I said, I'm going to live the rest of my life with him. And for the rest of my life that he was here, the connection was there. And I always felt to have known that much, to have had such a strong sense of our connection, I thought I must have known him before. Well, now I look at it the other way. Now I'll see him again. I just think the river of life is much, much longer than is covered by this one little blip in time, which is our physical incarnation. And I can just say from my own experience, Christine, that seeing it that way gives me much greater comfort in my body and much greater comfort with the fact that one day this particular thing will all be over. I want to thank you for being with me today. I hope you have a wonderful week ahead. I want to thank all the people who make this podcast possible. Thank you to Amanda Elliott. Thank you to Austin Kendrick. Thank you to Lauren Selsky and to Wendy Zoller and to all of the people at Cast Media. Thank you to you for listening. I hope that you'll go over to Apple Podcasts. I hope that you'll give us a good review, because if you do, that keeps us on the air. And tell your friends about it, and continue to have all the wonderful experiences that make life everything that it can be. And I look forward to being with you again next week. Thanks.